I'm so glad you're here. There are moments in life that act like a fault line, splitting your entire existence into a before and an after. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday, under the cold, unforgiving glare of the recessed lighting in a kitchen I had designed myself. It wasn't a gunshot or a car crash. It was a sentence. 6 words that took the beautiful, meticulously crafted snow globe of my life and shattered it against a concrete wall, leaving me standing barefoot in the glittering, treacherous dust of what used to be. The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. Not a peaceful, end-of-day quiet, but a heavy, charged silence, thick with unspoken things. It clung to the air in our cavernous, open-plan living space, muffling the distant hum of the city and the gentle ticking of the custom-made clock on the wall. A clock my husband, Mark, had given me on our 5th anniversary. He'd had it inscribed with a line from a poem. My compass, my true north. I used to love that clock. That evening, its rhythmic ticking felt less like a heartbeat and more like a countdown. I had spent the day wrestling with a difficult client, a tech startup CEO with an ego the size of Texas and a budget the size of Rhode Island. As an architect, I'd learned to navigate those treacherous waters, but it was draining. All I had wanted was to come home, slide out of my heels, and melt into the familiar comfort of our life together. I expected the warm, savory scent of one of Mark's culinary experiments. He was a brilliant corporate lawyer, but his real passion was cooking. I expected to see him by the Marble Island, a glass of Pinot Noir in his hand, a smear of flour on his cheek, his face lighting up when he saw me. Instead, I found the kitchen sterile and cold. The gleaming stainless steel appliances were dark. The 6-burner Wolf range was silent. The air held nothing but the faint, antiseptic scent of the lemon cleaner our housekeeper used. Mark was sitting at the far end of our 12-foot dining table, a single lamp casting long, distorted shadows across the room. He wasn't reading or working. He was just sitting there, staring at the polished surface of the table, his posture rigid. His laptop was closed. His phone was face down. It was the stillness of a predator, not the weariness of a husband. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "Hey," I said, my voice softer than I intended, a peace offering to a battle I didn't know had begun. "Tough day?" He didn't look up immediately. He let the question hang in the air, letting the silence stretch until it was thin and brittle. Then, he slowly lifted his head, and the man looking back at me was a stranger. His eyes, usually a warm, reassuring hazel, were flat and cold, like river stones. There was no flicker of recognition, no welcome. "You're home," he stated. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was an observation, delivered with the emotional investment of a man noting a change in the weather. I dropped my briefcase by the door, the soft thud echoing unnaturally in the quiet. I walked towards him, my heels clicking a nervous rhythm on the polished concrete floors. "Is everything okay, Mark? You seem off?" I reached the table and gestured around the empty kitchen. "I thought we were having dinner." I didn't see any takeout containers, so I asked why there was no dinner. That's when he said it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his expression. He just looked straight through me, as if I were a ghost he was tired of being haunted by, and delivered the 6 words that would become the anthem of my undoing. "Ask your replacement." The words didn't register at first. They felt like a foreign language, a jumble of sounds without meaning. My brain tried to process them, to fit them into the context of our 16-year marriage, of the life we had built from scratch. A bad joke? A poorly timed jab from a stressful day at the firm? I forced a weak, uncertain laugh. "My what? Mark, that's not funny. I'm exhausted and starving. If you didn't feel like cooking, you just had to say so. We can order something." He just stared at me, his silence a confirmation more damning than any shout. The coldness in his eyes began to seep into my bones, a terrifying, paralyzing chill. My replacement. The word echoed in the vast emptiness of the room, bouncing off the high ceilings and glass walls. It was an architectural term, something you specify for a worn-out fixture or an outdated appliance. A thing to be swapped out when it no longer served its purpose. Was that what I was? A fixture in his life? An appliance? The blood drained from my face. My breath hitched in my throat. I gripped the back of a dining chair to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, the words barely audible. "What does that mean?" He finally broke his gaze, a flicker of something annoyance, impatience, crossing his face. He gestured vaguely toward the front door with his chin. "She'll be here any minute. She can explain." My mind was a whirlwind of frantic, disjointed thoughts. An affair. It had to be an affair. The late nights he'd sworn were depositions. The sudden business trips to cities we'd once dreamed of visiting together. The way he'd started guarding his phone like it held state secrets. All the little red flags I had willfully ignored, painting them a more palatable shade of pink, telling myself I was being insecure, that I had to trust the man who was my compass, my true north. But this was so much worse than a simple affair. This was a coup, a hostile takeover of my life, happening right here in my own home. He was not just cheating on me, he was erasing me. The doorbell rang. The chime, a pleasant, melodic tune I had picked out myself, sounded like a death knell. Mark's expression didn't change. He simply said, "That'll be her." I was frozen in place, a statue of disbelief and horror. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just watched as he stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried, and walked to the front door. He opened it, and for a moment, the person standing on the other side was silhouetted by the porch light, a dark, anonymous shape. Then she stepped into the light, and the world tilted on its axis, throwing me into a black, suffocating void. It was my sister, my younger sister, Ava. She was standing there, a bright, triumphant smile on her face, holding a grocery bag filled with gourmet ingredients. She was wearing a silk blouse I recognized as one I had lent her last Christmas. A blouse she had sworn she'd lost. Her eyes met mine across the long expanse of the room, and her smile didn't falter. It widened. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying, false sweetness. "Oh, you're still here. How awkward." She brushed past Mark, walked into my kitchen, and set the grocery bag on my marble island. She looked around, taking in the space with the possessive air of a new owner. Then she turned back to me, her head tilted in a mockery of sympathy. "Don't worry," she said, her voice echoing Mark's chillingly casual cruelty. "I'll be making dinner." The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to grow louder and louder, each second a hammer blow against the fragile fragments of my heart. My compass, my true north. It had all been a lie. And in that moment, staring at the two people I had loved and trusted most in the world, I knew the before was over. The after had just begun, and it was going to be a war. If you're watching this video, if you've ever felt the ground crumble beneath your feet, please like and subscribe to my channel. I need to know you're out there. And tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from, because I want to know just how far the echo of a shattered life can travel. I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. Ava's words hung in the air, thick and poisonous, a stark contrast to the light, airy scent of the expensive perfume she was wearing, a scent I now realized was the same one that had faintly clung to Mark's shirts for months. I'd convinced myself it was from a colleague at his firm, a harmless transfer in a crowded elevator. The human mind is an incredible architect of self-deception when the truth is too monstrous to contemplate. I stood there, still clutching the dining chair, my body trembling with a violent internal earthquake. The sight of them together in my home, my sanctuary, was a physical assault. Mark stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a detached curiosity, as if he were observing a particularly interesting lab experiment. Ava, my sister, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose high school graduation speech I had helped write, whose tears I had dried after her first heartbreak, was now unpacking groceries onto my kitchen island as if she'd done it 1,000 times. She pulled out a fillet of wild-caught salmon, a bundle of fresh asparagus, a lemon. Ingredients for the exact meal Mark always requested for special occasions. Our occasions. Ava! I finally managed to choke out, my voice a ragged whisper. What is this? What are you doing? She paused, holding the lemon in her hand, and looked at me. The feigned sympathy was gone, replaced by a hard, glittering triumph. It was a look I'd seen before, in fleeting moments throughout our childhood, but had never truly understood until now. It was the look she got when she'd managed to convince our parents that the vase I had broken was her own fault, just so she could be praised for her honesty. It was the look she had when the boy I had a crush on in 10th grade asked her to the prom instead. I had always seen it as simple sibling rivalry, a younger sister's need to step out of an older sister's shadow. Now I saw it for what it was. A deep-seated, venomous jealousy that had been festering for decades. I'm making dinner for my boyfriend, Clara, she said, emphasizing the word boyfriend with a little smirk. Something you haven't seemed to have the time or energy for lately. The accusation was so absurd, so twisted, that it momentarily stunned me into silence. I was the one who had scaled back my burgeoning architectural firm, the one who had turned down a partnership opportunity in Chicago, all to support Mark's grueling path to making partner at his law firm. I was the one who managed our home, our finances, our social calendar, all while running my own freelance business from the home office I designed, ensuring he could focus solely on his career. I had built the scaffolding that allowed him to climb, and now they were both standing at the top, preparing to kick me off. You're lying, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength from the burgeoning rage. Mark, tell me she's lying. I turned to him, desperately searching for a trace of the man I married. A flicker of doubt, of guilt, of anything. There was nothing. His face was a blank canvas. Why would she be lying, Clara? He asked, his tone maddeningly reasonable. Things haven't been working between us for a long time. You know that. You've been so wrapped up in your little projects. So distant. We grew apart. Gaslighting. It was a word I'd read in articles, a concept I understood intellectually, but I had never felt its disorienting, toxic power until that moment. He was taking our history, 16 years of shared dreams and struggles, and rewriting it in real time. He was painting me as the neglectful, career-obsessed wife, a narrative so far from the truth it was laughable, yet he delivered it with such conviction that, for a terrifying second, I almost questioned my own reality. It was a masterful, cruel performance, Ava chimed in, her voice dripping with concern that was so fake it was almost parody. We didn't want it to happen, Clara. It happened. The connection was too strong to ignore. Mark needed someone who understood the pressures he was under, someone who could really be there for him. She placed a hand on her heart, her eyes wide and innocent, a perfect imitation of a woman caught in the throes of a tragic, uncontrollable passion. The two of them were a perfectly rehearsed duet of deceit. I felt like I was losing my mind. The room started to feel small, the walls closing in. I looked from Mark's cold, impassive face to Ava's triumphant, pitying one, and I felt a wave of nausea. In my house? I whispered, the words shaking. You're doing this in my house? Mark finally pushed himself off the wall and walked towards the table. He stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, a scent now tainted by my sister's perfume. Technically, it's my house, Clara, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. My name is the only one on the deed, remember? It was just cleaner that way when we bought it, with my firm handling the financing. Another memory slammed into me. Us, signing the papers for the house. He had told me it was a legal formality, a way to streamline the process through his firm's real estate division. He'd promised we'd add my name to it later. "It's just a piece of paper, honey," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "This is our home." It was another lie in a foundation of them. Every pillar of our life together was crumbling, revealing a rotten core I never knew existed. "So you've been planning this," I said, the realization dawning on me, cold and horrifying. "This isn't something that just happened. This was a calculated demolition." Ava had the audacity to look wounded. "That's not true. I love my sister. I would never want to hurt you." "Love me?" The word came out as a strangled laugh. "You don't know the first thing about love, Ava. You're a parasite. You've always been one. You latch on to whatever makes other people happy and you suck the life out of it." The truth, raw and unfiltered, finally spilled out of me. Her face hardened, the mask of innocence falling away completely. "Maybe," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "But at least I'm not the one being replaced. At least I know how to keep a man happy." She turned her back to me then and began chopping an onion with precise, aggressive strokes, the sharp thud of the knife against the cutting board punctuating the suffocating tension in the room. Each chop was an insult, each slice a victory. I turned to Mark, my last shred of hope dissolving. "After everything I did for you," I said, my voice breaking, "everything I gave up, this is how you repay me? With her?" He just shrugged, a gesture of casual indifference that was more painful than any insult. "People change, Clara. Needs change. You served a purpose in my life, and I'm grateful for that. You helped me get to where I am. But my life is different now. I need something different. Someone different." He said it so simply, as if he were discussing a change in his stock portfolio. I was an asset that had matured and was now being liquidated. The cold corporate language of his profession had completely replaced the language of love, of partnership, of humanity. I finally understood. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a stepping stone, and he had reached the other side. He no longer had any use for me. The rage that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over, a white-hot, cleansing fire. It burned away the shock, the grief, the disbelief, and left behind something hard and sharp. Resolve. I wouldn't break down. Not in front of them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and looked at them both, my two greatest loves, and my two greatest betrayers. "Get out," I said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 16 years of misplaced devotion. Ava stopped chopping. Mark raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry?" he said, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "I think you're confused. You're the one who is going to leave." "No," I said, my voice gaining volume and clarity with every word. "This is still my home, legally or not. I have my belongings here. My life is here. You want me out? You'll have to drag me out. But right now, tonight, I want the two of you out of my sight. Go to a hotel. Go to hell. I don't care. But get out of my house." I pointed toward the door, my hand steady. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Mark's face. He was a lawyer. He knew about tenant rights, about the optics of physically removing a spouse. He had expected tears and hysterics. He had expected a quiet, defeated exit. He had not expected a fight. He exchanged a look with Ava, a silent, frustrated communication. She just shrugged, a petulant look on her face, and went back to chopping her onion, as if she were above it all. Mark turned back to me, his voice a low growl. "Fine. Have it your way. Enjoy the empty house, Clara. It's all you'll have left when this is over." He grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door and walked out, slamming it behind him. Ava didn't even look up. She just said, "He'll be back for me." I stood there, alone in the silence, the sharp scent of raw onion making my eyes water. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fury. The battle lines had been drawn, and as I stood in the ruins of my life, I made a silent vow. They thought they were replacing me. They had no idea I was about to replace their entire world with a living nightmare. For a long time after Ava's taunt, "He'll be back for me," faded into the oppressive silence, I didn't move. I just stood in the center of my life's wreckage, the sharp, acidic scent of the onion she'd been chopping hanging in the air like the ghost of her malice. The house, usually a symphony of warmth and life, was utterly silent except for the low hum of the sub-zero refrigerator. It was the kind of profound quiet that follows a massive explosion, when the air is still thick with dust and the ringing in your ears is the only proof that the world hasn't ended completely. My first instinct was to shatter something, to pick up one of the heavy, hand-thrown ceramic bowls from the dining table, a wedding gift from my late grandmother, and hurl it against the wall. I wanted to hear the crack and splinter, to see the physical manifestation of the devastation I felt inside. But I didn't. Some primal, survivalist part of my brain took over, whispering that I couldn't afford a single moment of weakness. Not now. They had expected hysterics, a complete, emotional collapse. They had counted on it. Mark, the meticulous lawyer, would have factored my predictable, grief-stricken irrationality into his plans. My breakdown was a necessary variable in his equation for a smooth, swift victory. I would not give him that satisfaction. Instead of screaming, I walked, my steps feeling strangely heavy and deliberate, through the living room and into the home office. This room was my masterpiece, my sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves I'd designed, a massive drafting table overlooking the city skyline, walls painted a calming, deep charcoal. It was the one space in the house that was unequivocally mine, funded by my own clients, built from my own vision. On the wall was a framed photo of Ava and me as teenagers, our arms slung around each other on a beach in the Outer Banks, squinting into the Sunday. We looked so happy, so unbreakable. I reached out, my fingers tracing the outline of her smiling face on the cold glass. Then, with a slow, chillingly calm motion, I took the photo off the wall, walked back into the kitchen, and dropped it face down into the trash can, right on top of the onion skins Ava had left behind. It made a soft, final thud. It was my first act of war. A small one, but it was a start. The next move had to be strategic. My mind, trained to think in terms of blueprints, stress loads, and support structures, began to frantically search for a load-bearing wall in this collapsed building of a marriage. I needed a professional, not just any lawyer, but a shark. Mark was a senior partner at one of the top corporate law firms in the city. He was brilliant, ruthless, and he knew the system inside and out. He would hire the best divorce attorney money could buy, someone who would paint me as an unstable, gold-digging shrew before I even had a chance to speak. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to unlock my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over names. Friends, family. Who could I even trust? Ava was my only family, and she had just driven a knife through my heart. My friends were our friends, couples we socialized with. How many of them had known? How many dinner parties had I hosted, smiling and oblivious, while they exchanged knowing glances over their wine glasses? The paranoia was a cold poison seeping into my veins. Then I saw a name that made me stop. David Chen. We'd gone to college together, both in the architecture program, before he'd had a change of heart and gone to law school. We hadn't spoken in years, but I'd followed his career from a distance. He hadn't gone the corporate route. He'd made a name for himself as a tenacious, take-no-prisoners family law attorney. His firm's tagline, which I'd seen on a bus advertisement once, was simple and brutal. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. He was exactly the kind of shark I needed. It was past 10 o'clock at night, but I didn't care. I hit the call button, my heart hammering against my ribs. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert, not sleepy. David Chen. David. It's Clara. Clara Evans, I said, my voice cracking on my own name. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of him typing in the background. Clara! Wow! It's been a decade. How are you? The simple, polite question was too much. The dam I had so carefully constructed inside of me broke. A single, ragged sob escaped my lips. I'm not okay, David, I whispered. I'm really not okay. To his immense credit, he didn't offer platitudes or awkward condolences. His voice shifted, becoming instantly focused and professional. What's wrong? Are you safe? Physically? Yes, I said, taking a shuddering breath. But my husband just told me he's replacing me with my sister, and he's trying to kick me out of my house. I said the words out loud for the first time, and they sounded even more insane, more monstrous than they had in my head. Another pause. The typing stopped. Okay, he said, his voice calm and steady, a lifeline in my swirling sea of chaos. Listen to me very carefully, Clara. Do not leave the house. Do you understand? Do not, under any circumstances, pack a bag and go to a friend's or a hotel. Stay put. Legally, it's your marital residence, and leaving can be construed as abandonment. Did he threaten you physically? No, just that the house is only in his name. I heard him let out a low whistle. Of course, it island classic move. Okay, first thing tomorrow morning, you need to gather some things. Financial statements, bank accounts, credit cards, investments, retirement funds, both yours and any joint accounts. Tax returns for the last 5 years. Any property deeds or mortgage documents you can find. And one more thing. This is important. Do you have a prenuptial agreement? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. We had discussed it, briefly, before the wedding. Mark, the ever-practical lawyer, had brought it up. I, the romantic architect, had been horrified. I'd told him that marriage was a partnership, not a business transaction, that I was marrying him for love, not for his future earning potential. He had relented easily, smiling and telling me I was right, that our love was all the security they needed. Now I realized he hadn't relented at all. He had simply manipulated me into rejecting the one thing that might have protected me. No, I said, the word tasting like ash. We don't have one. David was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was grim. All right, Clara. This is going to be a tough fight. He's a corporate attorney, you said. He's going to play dirty. He's already laid the groundwork to screw you over financially. The house is just the beginning. What do I do, David? I pleaded, feeling a fresh wave of despair. He has all the power, all the money. No, he doesn't, David said, and for the first time I heard the steel in his voice, the fighter's edge that had made him famous. He has a weakness. Everyone does. Our job is to find it and exploit it. Right now, your job is to be a ghost. Don't engage with him or your sister. Don't answer their texts or calls. Be a stone wall. And be in my office at 9 a.m. sharp. We'll start building a firewall around you. We talked for a few more minutes, him giving me a list of immediate do's and don'ts. His calm competence a soothing balm on my raw nerves. When I hung up, the house was still silent. But it felt different. It was no longer just the scene of a crime. It was a battlefield. I spent the rest of the night in a fugue state, moving through the house like a ghost. I went into Mark's closet, a vast walk-in space filled with his bespoke suits and Italian leather shoes. On his dresser was a silver-framed photo of us on our wedding day. He was looking at me with such adoration, such love, or so I had thought. Now, the look in his eyes seemed proprietary, like a collector admiring a prized acquisition. I took the photo and placed it face down on his perfectly organized tie rack. I gathered the documents David had asked for, stuffing them into my briefcase. The numbers on the pages swam before my eyes. Our joint investment account, which had ballooned thanks to his bonuses, his 401k, a fortress of wealth I barely understood. I saw my own savings account, a respectable but laughably small sum in comparison. I had poured most of my income back into the house, into our life, into him. I had been investing in a future that was never mine to begin with. The final thing I did was walk into the master bathroom. It was a spa-like retreat with a steam shower and a deep soaking tub. On the vanity, next to my own collection of perfumes and lotions, was Mark's side. His electric razor, his expensive face cream, and a small, discreet bottle of cologne. I picked it up. It was a niche brand, something Ava had gifted him for his last birthday. "It just smells so successful," she had cooed, giving him a hug that had lasted just a little too long. I'd thought it was an odd, slightly too intimate gift from a sister-in-law. Now I understood. It was a brand, a territory marker. She had been marking him as hers, right under my nose. I unscrewed the cap, walked over to the toilet, and poured the entire $150 bottle of cologne down the drain. I watched the golden liquid swirl and disappear, the scent of success replaced by the chemical smell of the toilet bowl cleaner. It was a petty act, I knew. But in that moment, it felt like I had finally started to clean my house. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just sat on the couch in the dark, watching the city lights twinkle outside the massive windows, and I planned. For 16 years, I had used my skills to build a home. Now, I would use them to build a war machine. David was right. Mark had a weakness, and I would tear this entire city apart, brick by brick, until I found it. The next morning, I walked into David Chen's office feeling like a raw nerve ending. His office was the complete antithesis of Mark's firm. No mahogany desks or panoramic city views. It was a functional, almost gritty space in a less glamorous part of downtown, with stacks of case files lining the walls and the faint smell of strong coffee hanging in the air. It was the office of a man who was more interested in the fight than the facade. David was exactly as I remembered him from college, just with a few more worry lines around his eyes. He greeted me not with pity, but with a firm handshake and a cup of coffee. "Okay, Clara," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Let's see what we're up against." I laid out the documents I'd gathered on his cluttered conference table. He sifted through them with a practiced, efficient silence, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "Well," he said after a long 10 minutes, leaning back in his chair, "Mark's not an amateur. He's been planning his exit strategy for a while. The house is just the tip of the iceberg." He explained it to me in blunt, simple terms. The bulk of their liquid assets were in accounts solely under Mark's name. The investment portfolio, the high-yield savings, all of it. The joint account we used for household expenses had a healthy balance, but he predicted Mark would drain it by noon. My name was on our credit cards, but he was the primary account holder, meaning he could cancel them with a single phone call. "He's built a financial fortress around himself and left you outside the walls, in the cold," David said, his eyes meeting mine. "His strategy will be to bleed you dry. He'll cut off your access to funds, forcing you to rack up legal bills you can't pay. He'll try to force you into a quick, cheap settlement out of sheer desperation." The cold, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just a man leaving his wife. This was a corporate shark executing a hostile takeover, and I was the company being dismantled and sold for parts. "But what about marital assets?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "In this state, isn't everything acquired during the marriage split 50-50? "It is," David confirmed. "But proving what those assets are is the hard part. He's going to hide money. He'll have offshore accounts, shell corporations, deferred compensation schemes you don't even know exist. A man at his level at a firm like that, finding all of it will be like an archaeological dig. It will take time and a lot of money. Money he's about to cut you off from." A wave of panic washed over me. So what do I do? My freelance work is steady, but it's not enough to fight him. My savings will be gone in a month. David leaned forward, his expression intense. "First thing we do is file a TRO, a temporary restraining order, on all known assets. It will freeze the accounts before he can empty them. I'll have my paralegal file it electronically within the hour. It's a temporary fix, but it buys us some time." He then looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "Second, You need to liquidate any asset you have that is solely in your name. Stocks your parents left you? Your personal savings? Cash it all out. Now. Put it in a new bank account at a completely different bank. That's your war chest. It won't be much compared to his, but it's a start. He was right. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with my bank and brokerage firm. My voice a strange, calm monotone as I gave instructions to sell, to transfer, to close. It felt like I was dismantling my own safety net, but I knew I was just converting it into ammunition. By lunchtime, just as David had predicted, my credit cards were declined. The joint checking account was empty. A curt, automated email informed me that my access to our online banking portal had been revoked. The guillotine had fallen. I was financially decapitated from the life I had helped build. The reality of my situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage, the rejection notifications pinging on my phone, and I couldn't breathe. I was a successful, educated woman, and in the span of less than 24 hours, I had become completely dependent on a small, dwindling pile of cash. I had no access to the vast wealth I had helped my husband accumulate. I was, for all intents and purposes, destitute. This was his plan. To humiliate me, to terrify me, to break me down so completely that I would crawl back and accept whatever pathetic crumbs he and my sister decided to throw my way. That evening, I returned to a house that no longer felt like mine. It was just a beautiful, empty museum of a life that was over. I expected Mark and Ava to be there, ready for round 2, but the house was empty. On the kitchen island, however, was a single folded piece of paper. A cashier's check made out to me for $10,000. Attached was a sticky note in Mark's precise, elegant handwriting. Clara, a gesture of goodwill to help you get settled somewhere new. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow. Let's not make this ugly. $10,000. It was an insult wrapped in the guise of generosity. It was hush money. It was what he thought my 16 years of life, love, and sacrifice were worth. It was less than he'd spent on his last watch. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was what finally broke through my fear and despair. The fire that had been ignited the night before now roared to life. He wanted to make this not ugly. Oh, I was going to make it ugly. I was going to make it biblical. I was going to salt the earth of his entire existence. I left the check on the counter and went back to David's instructions. He told me to search for any document, any clue that could point to hidden assets. I started in our home office, the one space I thought was mine. But I quickly realized it had been his command center. I went through file cabinets, desk drawers, every nook and cranny. Most of it was what I expected. Old tax returns, mortgage documents, household receipts. But in the back of a bottom filing cabinet, tucked inside a folder labeled Old Client Contracts, I found something that didn't belong. It was a thin, leather-bound ledger, the kind you'd see in an old movie. It wasn't a firm-issued document. It was personal. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, dates, and numbers. It wasn't a financial ledger in the traditional sense. It was a list of names, some of which I recognized as high-profile CEOs and politicians, people Mark had mentioned as clients or contacts. Next to each name were cryptic notes and a series of numbers that looked like bank account codes and transaction amounts. But what made my blood run cold was a small, recurring annotation next to several of the entries. AV Transfer. AV Ava. My sister's initials. For years, Ava had struggled financially. She'd bounced from one low-paying job to another, always with a dramatic story about a terrible boss or a toxic work environment. I had lost count of the number of times I had loaned her money for rent, for car repairs, for a can't-miss business opportunity that always fizzled out. Mark had always been critical of it, telling me I was enabling her, that she needed to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. It had been a source of tension between us. Now, looking at this ledger, a sickening new reality began to form. These weren't just transfers, The numbers were too large, the names too powerful. And the dates, they corresponded with some of Mark's biggest case wins and business deals over the last 3 years. This wasn't Mark helping Ava out. This looked like a payment system, a way to move money discreetly, using my financially unstable sister as a pass-through, a ghost in the machine that no one would ever think to look at. He hadn't just been cheating on me with her, he had been using her, and she had let him. She had been his accomplice in what looked suspiciously like money laundering or an elaborate kickback scheme, all while playing the part of the destitute little sister to me, her personal ATM. The hypocrisy was staggering. The depth of the deception was almost incomprehensible. I sank to the floor, the ledger clutched in my hands, my mind racing. This was it. This was the weakness David had talked about. This wasn't just about marital assets or a messy divorce anymore. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that could destroy Mark's career, his reputation, his entire life. It was a nuclear bomb. And I was standing there, my finger on the button. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now, it was mixed with something else. A dark, thrilling sense of power. Mark had pushed me out of his fortress and left me for dead. He had no idea I was about to return with a battering ram, ready to bring the whole damned thing crashing down around him. He thought this was a divorce. He was about to find out it was an excavation, and I was going to dig until I hit bedrock. The leather ledger felt hot in my hands, like it was radiating the toxicity of the secrets it held. For the rest of that night, I sat at my drafting table, the city lights a blur outside my window, and I dove into the rabbit hole. I cross-referenced the names in the ledger with news articles and financial reports I could find online. Every name was a titan of industry, a political power player, a name associated with massive mergers, controversial zoning changes, and high-stakes litigation that Mark's firm had handled. The pieces began to click into place, forming a dark and intricate mosaic of corruption. The AV transfers were always made within weeks of a major, favorable outcome for these clients. A zoning variance inexplicably approved. A competitor's lawsuit suddenly dropped. A government contract awarded against all odds. It was a clear pattern of influence peddling, disguised as legal fees, and then funneled through my sister's accounts to make it disappear. Mark wasn't just a brilliant lawyer. He was a fixer. And Ava was his willing, and likely well-compensated, money mule. My heart ached with a strange, new kind of pain. It wasn't just the pain of a wife betrayed. It was the disillusionment of realizing the man I had admired, the man whose ambition I had worked so hard to support, had built his success on a foundation of pure filth. And my sister, my own sister, had been his partner in crime, smiling in my face, accepting my loans with feigned gratitude while she was likely siphoning off more money in a month than I made in a year. The thought of all the times I had worried about her, lost sleep over her financial struggles, made me physically ill. I had been a fool, a pawn in their long, elaborate game. The next morning, I was back in David Chen's office. My war chest, the ledger, placed carefully on his desk. I watched his face as he turned the pages, his usual stoic expression shifting to one of wide-eyed disbelief, then to a grim, focused intensity. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "do you have any idea what this is? This goes way beyond a divorce case. This is wire fraud. Potentially RICO-level stuff. If this is what it looks like, your husband isn't just going to lose his license. He could go to prison." The word prison hung in the air between us. Part of me recoiled at the thought. Despite everything, the idea of Mark, my Mark, behind bars was a horrifying one. But another, colder part of me felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. It would be justice. "And Ava?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She's an accessory," David said bluntly. "Willful participation in a conspiracy to commit fraud. She's just as culpable. They used her because she was family, because she was messy. They figured no one would ever connect the dots between a high-powered corporate lawyer and his perpetually broke sister-in-law. It was actually a brilliant cover. He closed the ledger and slid it back towards me. We can't use this directly. Not yet. It's likely inadmissible, fruit of the poisonous tree. You took it without his consent from his private files. His lawyers would have it thrown out in a second. But, he said, leaning forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes, we can use it as a map. It tells us where to dig. We need to find independent proof of these transactions. Bank records, wire transfers, something official that we can subpoena. But how? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Ava's bank accounts. We can't just get access to them. Not yet, David agreed. But we can file for a deposition. We can put your sister under oath and ask her about her sources of income. We'll ask her to produce financial records. She'll either have to perjure herself or expose the whole scheme. They'll fight it, of course. They'll claim it's a fishing expedition, irrelevant to the divorce. But we'll argue that we need to trace the true extent of the marital assets, and that includes any funds funneled to a third party. It was a strategy, a path forward. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a dangerous hope, but it was better than the suffocating darkness. Over the next few weeks, my life became a strange double existence. By day, I was a ghost in my own home. Mark had moved out, but the divorce papers had arrived, delivered by a cold-eyed courier. They were as brutal as I'd expected. He was offering me the $10,000 and nothing else, claiming that my erratic behavior and emotional instability had led to the breakdown of the marriage. It was a work of fiction, designed to paint me as the villain and him as the long-suffering victim. Ava, emboldened, would occasionally swing by the house with Mark under the guise of packing his things. In reality, they were there to flaunt their relationship, to remind me of my defeat. They would walk through the rooms, laughing and touching, Ava pointing out the changes she wanted to make. I think we should replace these cold, concrete floors with a warm hardwood, don't you, honey? She'd say, running her hand up Mark's arm. I would just ignore them, my silence, a weapon they didn't know how to fight. I followed David's instructions perfectly, becoming a stone wall. But by night, I was a detective. I became obsessed. I spent hours online, piecing together timelines, connecting the names in the ledger to Mark's work calendar, which, in a stroke of incredible luck, was still synced to the family's desktop computer. I was looking for a crack, a loose thread, anything that could help David build our case. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place. One of the names in the ledger was a real estate developer named Alistair Finch. He was a notoriously ruthless figure, known for getting controversial, high-density housing projects approved in protected neighborhoods. Mark had represented him in a particularly contentious zoning battle about 2 years ago. The project had been approved against all odds, despite massive community opposition. The ledger showed a significant AV transfer shortly after the city council vote. I started digging into Finch's corporate structure. It was a labyrinth of LLCs and holding companies, designed to obscure ownership. But as I went deeper, I found a name I recognized on the board of one of his smaller subsidiary companies, Sarah Jenkins. My friend Sarah. We had met years ago in a yoga class and had bonded instantly. She was a brilliant financial analyst, sharp and funny. We were part of the same circle of friends, the same couples who went to dinner parties. Sarah was married to a quiet, unassuming accountant named Tom. I stared at her name on the screen, my blood turning to ice. Sarah, my friend, was connected to this web of corruption. Was she another one who had known? Was her friendship also a lie? My first instinct was to feel betrayed all over again. But then I forced myself to think. Sarah had always been fiercely ethical. She'd once left a high-paying job at an investment bank because she didn't agree with their practices. It didn't make sense. And I remembered something she'd said a few months ago, over brunch. She'd been complaining about Alistair Finch, about how he was a nightmare to work for, how she felt like she was constantly being asked to creatively account for things. At the time, I had just listened sympathetically, offering the usual friend-style advice. Now, her words took on a new, urgent meaning. I had a choice. I could assume the worst, that she was part of the conspiracy, and cut her out of my life. Or I could take a risk, a huge risk. I could trust my gut, trust my memory of the woman I knew, and approach her. David would have told me it was a terrible idea, that it would tip our hand. But I knew this was a thread I had to pull. I called her. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you. It's about Alistair Finch, and it's about Mark." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice low and cautious, "Clara, what's going on? Meet me. My office. In an hour. And don't tell anyone you're coming." As I drove to her office building downtown, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I didn't know if I was driving toward an ally who could give me the weapon I needed to win this war, or if I was driving straight into another ambush, orchestrated by another person I had mistakenly called a friend. The city skyline rose up before me, a collection of glass and steel towers that suddenly looked less like a symbol of ambition and more like a forest of secrets. And I was walking right into the heart of it. Sarah Jenkins' office was on the 34th floor of a sleek, anonymous glass tower that scraped the sky. The elevator ride up was a silent, stomach-churning ascent into the unknown. As I stepped out into the hushed, carpeted hallway, I was met not by a receptionist, but by Sarah herself. She looked pale and tense, her usually vibrant eyes clouded with a deep, weary anxiety. She quickly ushered me into her office and locked the door behind us, a gesture that sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. This was more serious than I had even imagined. Her office was stark and minimalist, with a single large window offering a breathtaking, vertiginous view of the city below. "Clara, you look like you've been through hell," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Talk to me. What do you know?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I told her everything. I told her about Mark and Ava, about the cold, sterile kitchen and the 6 words that had detonated my life. I told her about the house, the frozen accounts, the brutal divorce papers. And then, my voice dropping even lower, I told her about the ledger. I didn't show it to her, but I described it in detail. The names, the dates, the cryptic AV transfers. As I spoke, I watched her face. It went from shock to a dawning, horrified recognition, and finally settled into a grim, hard resignation. The look in her eyes wasn't the surprise of a co-conspirator caught in a lie. It was the weary confirmation of someone who had long suspected the rot beneath the floorboards and was now being shown the full extent of the infestation. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. "I knew it," she finally whispered, more to herself than to me. "I knew there was something dirty about Finch's books, something I couldn't put my finger on." She turned back to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fury. "Clara, you're not just in a messy divorce. You've stumbled into a criminal enterprise. Finch doesn't just build buildings. He buys politicians. He bribes officials. He buries his competitors. And your husband? Mark is his cleaner. He makes the legal problems, the regulatory hurdles, the inconvenient people just disappear." The confirmation was a cold weight in my stomach. "And his payments?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "How does it work?" "It's a sophisticated shell game," she explained, her financial analyst brain kicking into high gear. "Finch's company pays Mark's firm, exorbitant legal retainers amounts far beyond any legitimate legal work. A portion of that fee is then kicked back, but not directly. It's moved through a series of offshore accounts and then funneled to a consultant for services rendered. In this case, your sister." She let out a bitter laugh. "It's almost brilliant in its simplicity. Ava has no discernible assets, No credit history to speak of. She's a financial ghost. The perfect cutout. The wire transfers to her account would look like gifts. An inheritance, lottery winnings, anything but a kickback to her powerful brother-in-law. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, her professional composure cracking. I've been staring at these balance sheets for months, knowing something was off. There were consulting fees paid out with no contracts, no invoices, no paper trail. Finch told me it was for political outreach, and my boss told me to let it go. He told me some questions are more dangerous to ask than to leave unanswered. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a shared understanding, a shared terror. We were two women who had been told to look the other way, to accept the comfortable lies we were being fed. "Why are you telling me this, Sarah?" I asked quietly. "You could lose your job, or worse." "Because I have a daughter," she said, her voice fierce. "And I'll be damned if I let her grow up in a world where men like Finch and your husband get to write the rules and destroy anyone who gets in their way. And because," she added, her voice softening, "you're my friend, Clara, and what they did to you, it's unforgivable." In that moment, the crushing weight of my isolation lifted, just a little. I had an ally. And she wasn't just any ally. She was an insider with the knowledge, and more importantly, the courage to fight back. "They've covered their tracks perfectly, Clara," she warned. "The official records, the ones a subpoena would turn up, will be clean. The real transactions, the smoking gun, will be in a shadow ledger. Something digital, encrypted, known only to a few key people. Finch, his CFO, and probably Mark. So we're back to square one," I said, the hope that had flickered inside me starting to dim. "We have the map, but the treasure is buried in a digital fortress we can't crack." "Maybe not," Sarah said, a thoughtful, calculating look on her face. She swiveled in her chair and typed a few commands into her computer. "Finch is arrogant. He believes he's untouchable. But arrogant men get sloppy. They use the same systems, the same passwords. They create patterns." She pulled up a series of encrypted files on her screen, a jumble of letters and numbers that meant nothing to me. "This is Finch's internal server. I have limited access, but maybe, just maybe, your ledger gives us a key." We spent the next hour hunched over her computer. I read out the dates and client names from the ledger, and Sarah used them as search parameters, trying to find corresponding file names or access logs in Finch's system. It was a painstaking, needle-in-a-haystack process. Most searches came up empty. But then, I read out a name from the ledger. Senator Matheson. I remembered the story. Matheson had been the key swing vote on a transportation bill that would have routed a new highway away from a massive commercial development Finch was planning. At the last minute, inexplicably, Matheson had changed his vote. The highway was approved, and Finch stood to make hundreds of millions. The ledger showed the largest AV transfer of them all, made the day after the vote. Try searching for transportation bill or Matheson around that date, I said. Sarah typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A single, encrypted file appeared on the screen. The file name was just a string of random characters, but the creation date was the day of the vote. "I can't open it," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "The encryption is military grade." My heart sank. We were so close. "Wait," I said, a thought suddenly sparking in my mind, a memory from a long-forgotten conversation. "Mark is obsessed with our anniversary. He uses the date for everything. Passwords, pins. He says it's the one number he'll never forget. Try it. 10/27. Sarah's eyes widened. "It's a long shot, but..." She typed the numbers into the password field. The screen flashed. "Access denied." "Damn it," she muttered. "Wait. Try it with his initials. M.E. Mark Evans." She typed, "Me 1027. Access denied." "Maybe with an A for Ava?" I suggested, a bitter taste in my mouth. She typed, Me 1027. Access denied. We were just guessing in the dark. It was hopeless. I slumped back in my chair, defeated. Then, another memory surfaced. It was from our honeymoon in Italy. We were sitting at a cafe in a small Tuscan village called San Rocco. Mark had been so happy, so relaxed. He'd raised his glass of Chianti and said, "To San Rocco, the place our real life begins." It had become a running joke between us. Whenever something good happened, we'd say it was a San Rocco moment. "Try San Rocco," I whispered. Just the name. Sarah looked at me, skeptical. "It's too simple. Just try it." She sighed and typed, "San Rocco 1027. The screen flickered. And then, the file opened. We both gasped. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a document. It was a detailed shadow ledger, almost identical in format to the physical one I had found, but far more comprehensive. It listed dozens of transactions, dates, offshore account numbers, and explicit notes detailing the purpose of each payment. Matheson vote, zoning variance kickback, judicial persuasion. And there, in a separate column, were the corresponding transfers to a holding company I'd never heard of, which then made payments to another account, this one labeled simply, the replacement fund. The sheer, cold-blooded audacity of it stole my breath. He had a name for it. A fund, likely for Ava, built from the proceeds of his corruption. He hadn't just replaced me in his heart and his home. He had created a literal financial entity based on my erasure. Sarah was already working, her fingers a blur as she plugged a flash drive into her computer. "I'm copying the file now," she said, her voice a tense whisper. "This is everything, Clara. This isn't just a smoking gun. This is the whole damn arsenal." An alarm on her desktop suddenly started to chime, a discreet but insistent beep. A small pop-up window appeared on her screen. "Unauthorized access detected. System lockout imminent." Sarah's face went white. "He knows," she breathed. "Someone got an alert. We have to go. Now." She yanked the flash drive out of the port just as her screen went black, replaced by a stark corporate logo and the words, "System locked. Security notified." We stared at each other for a heart-stopping second, the sound of the alarm still echoing in the silent office. We had the bomb, but the timer had just started ticking, and we had no idea how long we had until it blew up in our faces. We had to get out of the building, out of the city, before Mark and his powerful, dangerous friends realized what we had taken. The war had just gone from a bitter divorce to a deadly corporate espionage thriller, and we were now the primary targets. The walk from Sarah's office to the elevator was the longest 60 seconds of my life. Every footstep on the plush carpet sounded like a drumbeat announcing our guilt. Every person we passed in the hallway, a secretary carrying a stack of files, a junior executive talking on his phone, looked like a potential spy. My mind was a chaotic storm of adrenaline and terror. We had a flash drive in Sarah's purse that could dismantle a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy, and a silent, digital alarm was likely screaming our names in some dark server room. "We can't take the main elevator," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with controlled panic as she steered me towards a fire exit. "Security will be waiting for us in the lobby. We have to take the stairs." The thought of walking down 34 flights of stairs was daunting, but the thought of being cornered in the lobby by Alistair Finch's private security was infinitely worse. We slipped into the concrete stairwell, the heavy fire door closing behind us with a solid, definitive thud. The sudden silence was replaced by the echo of our own frantic footsteps on the metal stairs and the sound of my ragged breathing. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice echoing in the enclosed space as we began our descent. "They know someone accessed the file. They might not know who, but they'll check the security logs, the keycard access. They'll know I was in the office after hours, and they'll know I had a visitor. They'll have your name in minutes, Clara." The reality of her words was a fresh wave of ice water. Mark would know. He would know I was with Sarah, and he would guess what we had found. His attempt to financially cripple me would now escalate into something far more dangerous. He wasn't just trying to protect his wealth anymore. He was trying to protect his freedom. "We need to get out of the city," Sarah said, her words punctuated by her own heavy breathing as we clattered down the stairs. "We need a place to lie low, a place to figure out our next move. My parents have a cabin in the mountains, about 3 hours from here. It's remote, off the grid. No one knows about it except family. We can go there." By the time we reached the ground floor, my legs were burning and my lungs felt like they were on fire. We exited through a service door into a grimy back alley, the stench of dumpsters and stale city air, a jarring contrast to the sanitized world of the corporate tower. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows. It felt like we had just escaped from a pristine, high-tech prison into a much older, more dangerous one. We didn't go to our cars. Sarah rightly assumed they would be tracked. Instead, we walked, trying to blend in with the rush-hour crowds, two well-dressed women trying desperately to look like they weren't running for their lives. Sarah used a burner app on her phone to call for a rideshare, directing it to a pickup spot several blocks away. As we waited on a crowded street corner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every passing car, every person who glanced in our direction, seemed like a threat. "We can't go to my house or yours," I said, my mind racing. "We need to get our things. My laptop, the ledger." "No," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We can't. Your house is the first place they'll look. They might already be there. We have to assume everything we owned is compromised. We leave with what we have on us. Nothing else." The thought was terrifying. My entire life, my work, my personal files, my memories was on that laptop. But she was right. It was a liability. The rideshare arrived, a nondescript sedan, and we slid into the back seat, trying to act casual. The drive out of the city was a blur of traffic and anxiety. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a black SUV tailing us. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was Mark. I ignored it. It buzzed again. A text. "Clara, you're making a terrible mistake. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Give it back, and we can still resolve this quietly." It was a threat disguised as an olive branch. Give it back? He knew. The confirmation sent a tremor of fear through me. This was real. He was hunting us. Sarah saw the look on my face. "Turn it off," she said. "Turn off your phone and give it to me." I did as she said. She powered it down and wrapped it, along with her own phone, in a foil-lined snack bag from her purse, a makeshift Faraday cage. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it might help block the GPS tracking." The city lights eventually gave way to the dark, winding roads of the countryside. The farther we got from the city, the more the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a gnawing dread. I was a fugitive. Just yesterday, I was an architect, a wife, a normal person. Now I was on the run, with a flash drive full of secrets that could get us killed. Sarah's parents' cabin was exactly as she'd described. Small, rustic, and completely isolated, tucked away at the end of a long, unpaved dirt road, surrounded by a dense forest of pine trees. There was no cell service, no internet. It was a black hole in a connected world. Inside, it smelled of cedar and wood smoke. It was a simple, one-room space with a stone fireplace, a small kitchenette, and a couple of bunk beds. It was the safest I had felt in days. "Okay," Sarah said, after we had bolted the door and drawn the curtains. "Let's see what we've got." She pulled out a small, rugged-looking laptop from her go bag, a personal device she kept for emergencies, she explained. Critically, it had never been connected to her corporate network. She plugged in the flash drive. My heart pounded as the contents of the drive loaded onto the screen. There it was, the shadow ledger. "First thing," she said, "we make copies. Multiple copies." She copied the files onto two more encrypted flash drives she had with her, and then onto the laptop's hard drive itself. Now, she said, turning to me, we need to get this to someone we can trust. Someone with the power to use it, who isn't in Finch's pocket. David Chen, I said immediately. My lawyer. He's the only one. How do we get it to him? Sarah asked. We can't email it. The file is too big and it's too risky. We can't go back to the city. They'll be watching his office, watching my house, watching everywhere. We were trapped. We had the evidence, but no safe way to deliver it. We were sitting on a ticking bomb in the middle of nowhere. There has to be a way, I said, pacing the small cabin. There has to be someone. I thought of my friends, my colleagues, but the paranoia was too strong. Who wasn't connected to Mark's world in some way? Who could I trust implicitly? And then, a face flashed in my mind. A kind, concerned face under the harsh glare of streetlights. A man who had once been my student, now a police officer. A man who had seen the raw cruelty of my situation firsthand. Jake Miller. He wasn't a high-powered detective or a federal agent. He was just a traffic cop. But I remembered the look in his eyes in that courtroom that barely contained fury on my behalf. He wasn't part of the corrupt system of power brokers and corporate lawyers. He was outside of it. He was just a good man who had seen a great injustice. I think I know someone, I said to Sarah, a fragile tendril of a plan beginning to form in my mind. But it's a long shot, and it's going to be incredibly dangerous for him. Sarah looked at me, her expression grim. Clara, right now, everything is dangerous for everyone. We're all in. I found his number in the call history of my now-dead phone's contact list I'd scribbled on a napkin. We used Sarah's burner phone, driving a few miles down the mountain until we got a single, weak bar of service. I dialed the number, my hand trembling. Miller, he answered, his voice alert. Jake, it's Clara Evans, I said, my voice a rushed whisper. I'm in trouble. I'm in serious, serious trouble. I can't explain over the phone, but I have evidence. Evidence of everything. I need your help. I need to get it to my lawyer, but I can't go back to the city. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I had made a catastrophic mistake. Maybe he was in on it too. Maybe everyone was. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady, with no trace of hesitation. Where are you? I hesitated, the paranoia warring with my desperate need for help. I can't say. Okay, he said, understanding immediately. Okay, I get it. Here's what we do. There's an old diner off Route 84, about halfway between the city and the state line. The Mountain View Diner. It's a 24-hour trucker's spot. Can you get there? I think so, I said. Be there at 2 a.m. Sit in the last booth. Order a coffee. Leave the package under the table, taped to the bottom. I'll come in about 10 minutes after you leave and pick it up. Don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. We've never met. Got it? It was a plan straight out of a spy movie. It was terrifying, but it was also the only chance we had. Got it, I whispered. As we drove through the dark, winding mountain roads towards the diner, the forest a black, impenetrable wall on either side of us, I clutched the small flash drive in my hand. It was a tiny piece of plastic and metal, but it held the weight of so many ruined lives, so many dark secrets. And I was about to place it and my own life in the hands of a traffic cop I barely knew. It wasn't a long shot anymore. It was a blind leap of faith into the abyss. The Mountain View Diner was an island of harsh, fluorescent light in a sea of rural darkness. It was exactly as Jake had described. A long, low building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, with a handful of semi-trucks parked in the gravel, lot like sleeping metal beasts. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, grease, and rain, which had started to fall in a cold, steady drizzle. My nerves were stretched so taut I felt like I might snap. Sarah pulled our rented car into a spot at the far end of the lot, away from the main entrance, and cut the engine. For a moment, we just sat in the humming silence, watching the diner. "This feels insane," Sarah whispered, her breath fogging up the window, like something out of a movie. "The best plans usually do," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I took one of the encrypted flash drives, the one Sarah had labeled Goliath, and a small roll of duct tape from her glove compartment. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear off a piece. "You don't have to do this, Clara," Sarah said, her voice soft. "I can go in. They're looking for you, not me." I shook my head. "No, it has to be me. This is my fight." I looked at her, my friend, who had risked everything to help me. "You've done more than enough, Sarah. Get out of here. Drive back to the cabin. If I'm not back in an hour, or if you hear from David that the package didn't make it, you know what to do." We had already discussed the contingency plan. The other copies of the ledger were our insurance. If something happened to me or Jake, Sarah was to leak the files to a national news organization she had a contact at. It was a scorched earth policy. If we went down, we were taking everyone with us. She just nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Be careful, Clara." I slipped out of the car and into the cold, drizzling rain. The short walk to the diner entrance felt like a mile. With every step, I expected headlights to flood the parking lot, for black SUVs to swarm the diner. But nothing happened. The world remained quiet, except for the gentle hiss of the rain on the asphalt. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, hunched over plates of eggs and bacon. A lone waitress with tired eyes was refilling sugar dispensers. I slid into the last booth, the cracked red vinyl cold against my skin. The booth gave me a clear view of the entrance and the parking lot. The waitress came over. "Coffee, hon?" she asked, her voice raspy with fatigue. "Yes, please," I said. Black. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribcage. I kept my hands under the table, my fingers fumbling with the flash drive and the duct tape. When the waitress turned to get the coffee, I quickly and clumsily taped the drive to the underside of the table, making sure it was secure and out of sight. My hands were slick with sweat. The coffee arrived, hot and bitter. I wrapped my cold hands around the mug, trying to look like just another weary traveler taking a late-night break. I forced myself to take a sip. It scalded my tongue. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. I watched the clock on the wall, its red second hand sweeping in a relentless, unforgiving circle. Every time the bell over the door jingled, my entire body tensed. But it was just another trucker, another traveler of the night. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I put a $10 bill on the table, slid out of the booth, and walked out without looking back. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the lights of the diner in the darkness. I made it back to the car, my clothes soaked, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. The handoff was complete. Now it was up to Jake. Sarah was gone, as we'd planned. I was alone. I started the car and was about to pull out of the lot when a pair of headlights cut through the rain, turning into the diner. It was a police cruiser. My heart leaped into my throat. It had to be Jake. I watched as he got out of the car, his uniform dark with rain, and walked into the diner. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It had worked. I waited another 5 minutes, just to be sure, and then I saw him exit the diner and get back into his cruiser. He didn't look in my direction. He just pulled out of the lot and headed back towards the city. The package was on its way. I started to drive, my mind finally allowing a sliver of hope to break through the fear. We had done it. We had passed the torch. Now, David could start the fire. But as I was pulling onto the dark, empty highway, a sudden, blinding light filled my rearview mirror. A large, dark truck that had been parked on the shoulder of the road roared to life, its high beams pinning me in their glare. It pulled out aggressively behind me, tailgating me, its massive grille filling my entire mirror. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This wasn't a coincidence. They had been waiting. They had been watching the whole time. Had they seen me? Had they seen Jake? My mind raced. I floored the accelerator, the small rental car's engine screaming in protest. The truck behind me matched my speed effortlessly. I swerved into the other lane. It swerved with me. This was a chase. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably, forgetting for a moment that it was turned off and wrapped in foil. I was alone, on a dark, rainy highway, being hunted. The truck pulled up alongside me. I risked a glance. I couldn't see the driver through the rain-streaked tinted window, but I knew who had sent them. Mark. Finch. This was their response. Not a legal maneuver, but brute force. The truck swerved sharply towards me, forcing me onto the shoulder. My tires screamed on the wet asphalt as I fought to control the car. The guardrail loomed just feet away, a barrier of steel between me and a steep, wooded embankment. They weren't trying to stop me. They were trying to run me off the road. They were trying to kill me. In that split second, everything became crystal clear. My training as an architect, my ability to see angles and trajectories, kicked in. I saw the curve in the road ahead, the angle of the embankment. I had one chance. Instead of fighting it, instead of letting him push me over the edge, I did the one thing he wouldn't expect. I turned the wheel into the truck. The sound was a deafening shriek of metal on metal. My car spun out of control, the world outside the windows becoming a dizzying, terrifying blur of rain and darkness. I remember the sickening crunch as the car hit the guardrail, the explosion of the airbag. And then, nothing but a vast, silent, all-consuming blackness. When I woke up, the first thing I was aware of was the rain, cold and relentless, falling on my face. The second was a searing pain in my side and the coppery taste of blood in my mouth. I was slumped over the steering wheel. The driver's side door crushed inwards. The windshield was a spider web of shattered glass. Through it, I could see the dark, hulking shape of the truck, stopped 100 feet down the road. The engine was still running. A figure got out. Even in the rain and darkness, I recognized the silhouette. It wasn't some hired goon. It was Mark, my husband. He started walking towards my car, his movements calm and unhurried. He was coming to finish the job, to make sure his replacement was permanent. Adrenaline, pure and potent, surged through me, overriding the pain. I had to get out. My door was jammed shut. I fumbled with the passenger side door. It groaned, but it opened. I half fell, half crawled out of the car, my body screaming in protest. I scrambled into the ditch on the side of the road, the cold mud and wet leaves clinging to me. I hid behind a large oak tree, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I watched as Mark reached my car. He peered into the shattered driver's side window. I saw the faint glow of his phone as he used its flashlight to look inside. He saw the empty seat, the open passenger door. I saw his body tense. He knew I was gone. He started sweeping the flashlight beam across the dark woods, the beam cutting through the rain like a searchlight. It passed over my hiding spot once, twice. My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the rough bark of the tree, trying to become invisible. He was calling my name. "Clara! It doesn't have to be this way. Just give me the drive. We can still walk away from this." His voice, the voice that had once whispered words of love to me, was now the voice of my own personal boogeyman, a monster hunting me in the dark. The flash drive. He thought I still had it. He didn't know about Jake. He didn't know it was already gone. That was my only advantage. As he moved farther down the road, searching the woods, I saw my chance. Painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. I had to get away. I stumbled back towards the highway, staying in the shadows. And then I saw it. In the distance, coming towards us, a pair of flashing blue and red lights. Someone had seen the crash. Someone had called it in. Hope, fierce and desperate, flared in my chest. But the hope died as the police cruiser got closer. It wasn't just any cruiser. I recognized the unit number on the side. It was Jake's car. He was coming back, but he wasn't coming back to save me. Mark saw the lights, too. He turned and ran back to his truck. But as he did, he looked directly at the approaching cruiser, and he did something that made my blood run cold. He raised his hand and gave a small, almost imperceptible wave, and from the driver's seat of the cruiser, a hand waved back. The cruiser wasn't coming to help. It was the cleanup crew. Jake wasn't my savior. He was part of it. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it was almost sublime in its horror. The person I had just entrusted with my only weapon was working for the enemy. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, and I was trapped between my murderous husband and the corrupt cop who was coming to help him bury the evidence. The world seemed to slow down, the falling rain turning into thick, syrupy droplets. The flashing red and blue lights of Jake's cruiser painted the wet road in demonic, pulsing colors. The wave between Mark and Jake wasn't a signal of a secret alliance. It was a hunter acknowledging his beater, flushing the prey out into the open. My mind, reeling from the crash and the profound betrayal, struggled to process the new, horrific reality. Jake, my former student, the man whose righteous anger in the courtroom had felt so genuine, was a snake. Another actor in this elaborate, cruel play. His concern, his offer of help, the elaborate spy movie handoff at the diner, it had all been a performance. A trap to get the evidence out of my hands and deliver it straight to the enemy. My life was no longer just in danger. It was forfeit. There would be no trial now, no justice. Just a tragic, single-car accident on a dark, rainy night. A grieving husband. A story the papers would print for a day and then forget. Mark had already scrambled back into his truck and was speeding away, disappearing into the darkness. He had done his part. Now it was Jake's turn to secure the scene. The cruiser pulled up next to my wrecked car, its lights bathing the area in an eerie, strobing glow. Jake got out, his movements methodical. He didn't rush to my car to check for survivors. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the road, the ditch, the woods. He was looking for me. I was still hidden behind the oak tree, my body screaming in pain, my mind a vortex of terror and rage. Every instinct told me to run, to disappear into the woods. But where would I go? I was injured, disoriented, with no phone and no allies. Running would only postpone the inevitable. He would hunt me down. I had only one card left to play. It was a desperate, insane long shot, but it was all I had. The second flash drive. The one Sarah had labeled Damocles, still tucked away in the cabin. And Sarah herself. They didn't know about her. They thought I was alone. They thought the drive Jake now possessed was the only copy. That was their blind spot. I had to get to a phone. I had to warn her. As Jake's flashlight beam swept the woods, getting closer to my hiding spot, I made my move. I didn't run away from the road. I ran towards it. I burst out from behind the tree. Not towards the darkness, but back towards the flashing lights of the cruiser. The move was so unexpected that it startled him. He spun around, his flashlight catching me in its beam. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice a mixture of surprise and something else annoyance. The mask of the concerned cop was gone. His face was hard, cold. "There you are. You're hurt. Let's get you in the car." He started walking towards me, one hand outstretched in a gesture of false comfort, the other hand resting near the butt of his gun. I didn't stop. I kept moving, stumbling, my injured side a blaze of agony. I wasn't running towards him. I was running past him, towards his car. The passenger door was unlocked. I yanked it open and lunged inside, my body collapsing onto the seat. I reached for the one thing I knew had to be there, the police radio. My fingers closed around the microphone. "Don't be stupid, Clara," Jake snarled, reaching the door and grabbing my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "It's over." "It's not over until I say it's over," I gasped. and with my last ounce of strength, I pressed the button on the radio. "Mayday! Mayday!" I screamed into the microphone, my voice ragged and desperate. "This is a civilian. Officer Jake Miller, badge number 724, is attempting to kill me. I have evidence of a conspiracy involving corporate attorney Mark Evans and real estate developer Alistair Finch. They tried to run me off the road on Highway 84 near mile marker 62. He has the evidence. It's on a flash drive. He's trying to destroy it." Jake ripped the microphone from my hand and threw it onto the floor, his face a mask of pure fury. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. He pulled me out of the car, his grip brutal. But it was too late. I knew how police radios worked. My desperate plea had just been broadcast across the entire county dispatch network. Every cop on duty, every dispatcher, every state trooper within a 50-mile radius had just heard my message. The silence on the radio was damning. A call like that, naming an officer, would be met with a flurry of questions. The fact that the radio had gone dead immediately after my transmission was a confirmation of foul play. Help wasn't just coming. An army was coming. The sound of distant sirens began to cut through the night. Faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Jake heard them too. The look on his face was something I will never forget. It was the look of a man whose perfectly constructed world had just been obliterated. The hunter had become the hunted. He shoved me away from him, his mind racing, looking for an escape that no longer existed. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a desperate, cornered animal hatred. Then he did something I never expected. He ran. Not to his car, but to mine. He reached through the shattered window and fumbled around inside. He was looking for the drive. He thought I had faked the handoff, that I had hidden it in the car. He didn't realize he was the one who had it. Or worse, he was trying to plant it. The sirens were closer now, a chorus of approaching justice. Jake gave up on my car and ran to the edge of the woods, disappearing into the trees just as the first state trooper cruiser screeched to a halt, its headlights flooding the scene. In seconds, the crash site was swarming with police. I was immediately surrounded, not by aggressors, but by protectors. Paramedics were cutting away my clothes, checking my injuries. A female officer was wrapping a warm blanket around my shoulders, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's okay, ma'am. You're safe now." I was safe, but the war wasn't over. "He took it," I gasped to the officer, my voice hoarse. "Officer Miller! He has a flash drive. It has everything. You have to find him." The officer spoke into her radio, her voice crisp and urgent. "All units, be advised. Suspect is Officer Jake Miller, on foot, last seen entering the woods east of the crash site. He is considered armed and dangerous. He may be in possession of key evidence related to an ongoing investigation." The manhunt had begun. As they loaded me into an ambulance, the adrenaline began to fade, and the pain crashed over me in a tidal wave. My last conscious thought was of the ledger. Not the digital copy that Jake now had, but the original. The physical, leather-bound book that had started it all. I had left it at the house. In my haste, in my terror, I had left the map to their entire criminal world sitting in my office. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Mark would be on his way back there to get it. The race was on. A manhunt in the woods for a corrupt cop and a digital bomb, and a desperate race back to the city to secure the original sin before my husband could bury it forever. I had fired my last shot. Now, all I could do was pray it had hit its target. The hospital was a blur of bright lights, hushed voices, and the sharp antiseptic smell of rubbing alcohol. They told me I had 2 broken ribs, a concussion, and a laceration on my side that required stitches. But the physical pain was a dull, distant ache compared to the roaring anxiety in my mind. Every time a nurse came in, I expected to see Mark's face, or Finch's, coming to finish the job. But I wasn't alone. David Chen was there, his face a grim mask of controlled fury. And, to my immense relief, Sarah was there too. She had gotten my frantic, one-word text, "hospital," which I had managed to send from a paramedic's phone, and had driven straight there. "They found him," David said, his voice low as he stood by my hospital bed. "Jake. They cornered him by a river about 2 miles from the crash site. He still had the flash drive on him. He's in custody. He's already talking, trying to cut a deal." A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. The evidence was safe. "And Mark?" I whispered. "State troopers went to your house," David said. "It was empty. But they were too late. The place had been tossed. They were looking for something. The ledger." My heart sank. He had gotten it. The physical proof was gone. "It doesn't matter," Sarah interjected, stepping forward. "What they don't know is that the night we found the digital ledger, I didn't just copy it. I set up a continuous, real-time backup to a secure, anonymous cloud server. When Finch's system locked me out, the backup was already complete. And when I heard about the crash, I sent the login credentials to David and to the district attorney's office." David allowed himself a small, grim smile. The DA, who is a political rival of Senator Matheson, was more than happy to receive an anonymous tip containing a treasure trove of evidence against his biggest adversary. Search warrants were issued an hour ago. For Alistair Finch's office, for your house, and for Mark's office at the firm. The scope of it was breathtaking. While I was lying in a ditch, bleeding, these two, my lawyer and my friend, had been orchestrating the takedown. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Alistair Finch was arrested at a private airport, attempting to board his jet to a country with no extradition treaty. Mark was arrested at his desk, in the middle of a conference call. A quiet, humiliating end to his reign of arrogance. The news broke the next day, a media firestorm. The headlines were sensational. Powerful attorney, real estate tycoon, and senator implicated in massive bribery scheme. My name was kept out of it, at least for now. But the story of the whistleblower wife was hinted at. But the sweetest, most satisfying piece of news came from a small, almost buried detail in one of the articles. Ava. She had been arrested at a high-end spa, where she had been in the middle of a $1,000 facial. The police had frozen all her accounts, the accounts funded by the replacement fund, and found that she had been preparing to flee the country as well. Her picture, a grainy shot of her being led away in a fluffy white spa robe, her face a mask of shocked indignation, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The legal battle was long and messy, but the outcome was never in doubt. Faced with the irrefutable evidence on the drive and Jake Miller's testimony, the dominoes fell one by one. Senator Matheson resigned in disgrace. Alistair Finch was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Mark, stripped of his law license and his reputation, took a plea deal and was sentenced to 10 years. And Ava, my parasitic sister, was sentenced to 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. My divorce was finalized in a quiet, unceremonious hearing. With Mark's assets frozen and his crimes exposed, the judge awarded me the house and a significant portion of the legitimate marital assets. The $10,000 goodwill check, which I had saved, was framed and now hangs in my bathroom as a reminder of the price of arrogance. The house, once a museum of lies, was the first thing I changed. I sold the cold, modern furniture. I tore out the sterile, white kitchen. I painted the walls in warm, vibrant colors. I took my drafting table out of the small office and placed it in the center of the massive living room, turning the entire space into my creative studio. I was reclaiming my life, one architectural change at a time. Sarah and I became inseparable. Our friendship, forged in the crucible of fear and betrayal, was now one of the load-bearing walls of my new life. We never talked much about that terrifying night, but we didn't have to. The understanding was there, a silent bond between two women who had stared into the abyss and had chosen to fight back. One sunny afternoon, about a year after the arrests, David Chen called me. "I have something for you," he said. I met him at his office. He handed me a simple leather-bound ledger. The state police recovered it from a safe deposit box Mark rented under a false name, he explained. I thought you should have it. I took the ledger, the physical record of their crimes. I didn't open it. That night, I built a fire in the newly installed fireplace in my living room. I sat before it, the warmth on my face, and I dropped the ledger into the flames. I watched as the pages curled, blackened, and turned to ash, the secrets and lies they held turning into smoke and disappearing up the chimney. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about releasing its power over me. They had tried to replace me, to erase me from my own life. They had failed. I had discovered that I was not a fixture to be swapped out, but the architect, and I could tear down the old structure and build something new, something stronger, something that was entirely, unequivocally mine. My name is Clara Evans. I am an architect, not just of buildings, but of my own life. And my new blueprint doesn't include compasses or true norths defined by anyone else. My direction is my own. The foundation is solid, and for the first time in a very long time, the view from my window is clear.